Good morning and welcome to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. And now, Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
Welcome into today's edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. I'm Steph with your weekly host, Scott Wardell himself.
Hi, Steph. How are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm great.
Great.
Boy, what happened to the month of August?
I said that a couple days ago. I feel like I say that every month, but
Right.
honestly, August went so fast.
Incredibly fast. And, we said the same exact thing about July, but this was a blink and you'll miss it month
Yeah.
if I've ever seen one. And I don't know if it was just because of the way the weather came at us or what it was, but Labor Day, which is what we're celebrating this weekend, just came at us so fast.
Unbelievable. And
Yeah.
kids everywhere are crying. They're going back to school.
Well,
here.
some, but I know some that are very anxious to get back to school.
That's true.
At least reported by their mothers. Maybe it's their mothers that are reported to have them.
Yay, kids are going back to school.
Hard to say, but
Yeah.
it's a time of year, and we're going to talk a little bit about this morning, where people tend to get a little serious about things, where in the summertime they've got vacations, they've got time off, and they're just, more floating, frankly. But this time of the year, we notice in our business that people start to really kind of grab onto things and say, okay, kids are back to school. We're back more seriously to work in some fashion.
Right.
We're not taking vacations, and we got to grab onto a few things.
Okay. Well, our topic today is actually about putting the defense into your investment portfolio. Great topic today because it was another awful week for the stock market.
It really was a crazy week on the stock market. At the beginning of the week, of course, we had some very nice gains, and people were starting to feel like, oh, gosh, we're getting back some of what we lost with all of the whipsaw stuff that was going on right after the whole issue about the debt ceiling. And then the last 2 days of this week were, pretty devastating on the market. And Friday, of course, we lost 253 points.
Yeah.
So, it was really a very, very difficult week for many, many investors. And I know we've already got some people who are having that self-talk saying, well, thank goodness that I'm not in the market. And we're going to talk to those folks today, too, because there's going to be some missed opportunities, I think, for them if they've completely shut the market out, and those that are in the market who maybe felt a little sense of relief in the tail end of last week and the first part of this week that should now probably be thinking again about defense. And that's what the topic of today's show is. We used an analogy here a few weeks ago. I had a guest on the show who is a football player and really deep into football, and I say, what is that common saying that says, offense gets you to the playoffs,
Yep.
but what wins you the Super Bowl? Defense. Well, a lot of people's portfolios don't have adequate defense in it. And before anybody jumps to any conclusion today, as I say that, I'm not talking about selling out positions or selling low or anything like that. It is, how do you structure your portfolio so you have adequate defense? So when we get these crazy markets like we've had, that you're not, if you're losing sleep at night, you don't have the right portfolio. You either have too much risk, or you don't have enough defense built in, or you don't have enough cash reserves, or your income bucket isn't filled up. It could be any of those things. But if this stuff is worrying you, you definitely need to take a look and examine it. And I'll tell you to start with, here's what's not the right answer. A lot of people during 2008 and the beginning of 2009, their answer was, when I get those statements, I don't even open them up. I'm going to try and convince people today, open them up.
Open the mail.
Open the mail, take a look at it, and the reason is it needs your attention and your examination, and you will eventually feel better about it. At that moment, you might not, but it needs your attention, and we're going to tell people today a little bit about a few things that they can do to structure a portfolio so that they don't lose sleep at night, and it has some defense in it.
Now, before we really get in today, Scott, we maybe should mention people who are new to the show might not know you usually have a guest.
I almost always have a guest.
We are flying just the two of us today in studio.
Absolutely. It's just the two of us. And I thought, what a great opportunity for us, just to have a chat with our listeners and really talk about this important issue of what the things that you've got to examine. It's Labor Day weekend, and when you get back to work on Tuesday, hopefully after listening to today's show, you might say, you know what, I'm going to look up my 401k balance in a couple of things. Or over the weekend, you might actually pull your investment file from your IRAs, and you might do a little bit of examination, because here's what happens virtually every week in my office. Someone comes in, they may be doing a small account review from some little investment or life insurance contract or something that they have had for years and years and years, and finally they said, you know what, we should probably pay attention to this and take a look at it. In the course of the conversation, we usually find 3 or 4 things that they have not paid attention to. Because what are they doing? They're working hard. They're living their lives.
Right.
They're sending their kids to college. And I'll tell one story right out of the gate here. I worked with a couple here this last week. And just through the course of our conversation, where we asked questions about, their cash reserve, their debt situation, what the rate of interest is on the debt, this really hardworking couple that is doing majority of the things correctly disclosed to me that they had a mortgage which was much, much lower than the value of their house. It was actually only about 1/3 of the total value of their house, and it was at 7%. So obviously I asked them, well, have you thought about refinancing? And their answer was, well, we've really paid most of that interest already, and it's behind us. And, here's what it tells me is that really the concept of how interest works on your loan, it was a foreign concept to them. So what I explained to them, well, you're still paying, at 7% at, $70,000 mortgage, you're still paying $4,900 approximately a year, amortized, so it's a little bit less, $4,900 a year. And if you drop that interest rate by 2%, which you could probably do from 7 to 5, you're going to save yourself $1,400 every stinking year. And this
is a big chunk of money.
These were hard-working folks. And they're sending kids to college, and their cash flow is a little tight, so $1,400 a year makes a difference. Now, the other thing they said is, gosh, isn't there some sort of payback period on that? Because often there's points and other things that are associated with it. And I said, absolutely there is. But in a case like yours, that payback period might be less than a year. It might be less than a year that they're money ahead on something like that. So at any rate, I think it's really important for people to find those things. The same couple, by the way, delightful couple. My gosh, they're kind of salt of the earth, hardworking, sending their kids to college, just really wonderful people, frankly. Same couple as we were talking about. I said, now, one of them works for a particular school system. I won't name it on the air. And I said, so you have a 403B? And she said, well, no, I don't. And I said, well, do you have 457 then? I don't want people to run off because they don't understand these terms, but those are the two things that are typically offered to people that work for public schools.
Okay.
And she said, well, I think I got a little bit going in there. And I said, well, are you having enough to get the match? The matching funds that go into it, similar to what someone does in a 401k. And she said, I don't think I have a match. Well, you know what? I know the details of that particular school system because I have several clients that are in it. And although, they don't match every dollar, there are matching dollars. So if they go and they find out that she's able to get the match and start either a 403B or put the money into 457, the point of that is that they'll get a match of between $500 and $1,500 per year into their retirement account.
Wow.
Just by paying attention. We said when we started this show, the reason we're doing it is to get people to pay attention to important things. And people are working hard. They're trying to manage their lives day to day. And with a little bit of consultation, they can be in this case, find some opportunities to improve their overall financial strategy,
Right.
to improve that strategy and hopefully improve the net result.
Well, I think that's a testament to what you do and this show every week is, like you said, these hardworking people. And they may even know they have to pay attention, but they're saying, pay attention to what? Where do I look? And so
Right.
you hope to give them that information to get them started.
And, I work with a guy by the name of Brian Lampert, who is helping me write my book because he's far more gifted with the written word than I am. And so we've been re-interviewing some people that I had initially interviewed for my book, and he has made some comments to me that sort of confirm the direction that we're going with this whole effort, and that is he said, why is it that people wait so long before they seek the help of a professional? And he's saying it with great passion because he said he sees these people that flounder, or they go the wrong direction, or they make these terrible mistakes, and they don't seek the help of a professional to help them sort this out. And he's asked that to these individuals. Why did you wait so long before you went in to talk to someone? And their common answer is, I was too embarrassed. Like for instance, if they had more debt than they wanted, or they really didn't feel like they understood the terms, and it was a topic that it was potentially over their head.
Right.
I got to tell you, a good financial advisor, a good financial planner, a consultant, whatever term that you want to use, isn't someone who makes you feel stupid. If you are in a free consultation with someone and they're making you feel stupid and talking over your head, then you know this is not the right one for you.
Sure.
Okay, so, close the meeting early, thank them for their time, and go on and find a good one. But please don't give up, because so many people just really don't understand the basic mechanics involved with finance. And when you get those basic mechanics down, frankly, things, the order itself is comforting for people.
Right.
To say, oh, well, that's how that goes. That's how that works. If you understand your own personal cash flow better than you've understood it before, you are on the right track.
So those mechanics that you speak of kind of tie back to the sports analogy from before.
Yes.
We're looking at offense versus defense, and today focusing specifically on defense.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I know last week with your guest you talked about the stages of people's financial lives, 5 main stages. Can
Right.
you review for those what those are?
Absolutely. We were delighted last week to have Brad Hewitt on the show, the CEO and president of Thrivent Financial. And Brad has this, and I call it just the profound but simple truth of the stages of people's lives. And now, not everybody starts at the bottom and moves their way up, but you can take almost any person or family and you can look at these, what we call the 5 S's. And the bare bottom is surviving. They just barely are getting by. The next is struggling. And struggling is we're getting by, but it's not easy.
Right.
You get to the third level, that's stable. A lot of people just seek to be at stable, and a lot of people stall at stable. The next level is secure. So like, okay, I'm secure, things are in hand. And the last is an area we call surplus. It's also referred to as the sharing era. So that would be a 6th S, by the way. And surplus is where people start to say, my cash flow is more than adequate, my investments are more than adequate, and that's where they start down the path of giving. And that was, of course, the topic of last week's show, generosity.
Right. And
we're going to talk a little bit about that because we have more of those books. It's a book called Generosity, written by Gordon MacDonald, and it is a series of devotions. So, frankly, it's not like some other material we give away. This one, frankly, is a devotional book. And so, if you're not the spiritual type, you probably won't want this one. On the other hand, if you say, I want to learn more about money and I want to learn more about, some of the things the Bible tells me about money, then this is a really good book. And I would encourage you to call, and I'm going to give the number right now, Steph,
Sure.
because we've got some of these books, and all they have to do is call this number and leave us a voicemail and just say, I want the book Generosity, and we'll mail it out.
You have to leave name and address.
Name and address. Name and address, exactly. And you need to call this number, 1-855-346-4332. I'm going to give it to you one more time. 1-855. That's a toll-free number, by the way. 1-855-346-4332.
All right. Okay.
So write that number down and ask for the book Generosity, and we'll send it out. And I think you'll understand these different stages that we're talking about, as we're talking about going from surviving to struggling to stable to secure and surplus.
Well, before we kind of dive into those first two, surviving and struggling, let's pause for a moment, but we'll come back and get into all of the details of putting defense into your investment portfolio. It's right here on Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
Welcome back to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks for joining us this week. Our topic, putting defense into your investment portfolio. Just before the break, we kind of recapped what those 5 or 6 stages are.
Right, and I got to tell folks a little bit how this relates to defense.
Sure.
In that, if you are, and I guess the stages are surviving, struggling, stable is next, then secure, and then surplus. And then if you think of, well, what stage am I at? Am I secure? Am I stable? Am I struggling? Where am I at? And then through that to say, what is the thing that might knock me backwards one step? Because a lot of folks in this last 3 years went backwards. They may have been secure and went back to stable. They may have been stable and went back to struggling. So what's the thing that could knock you backwards? And then the other thing is, what are the things that could move you forward? So that if you are, struggling and you say, man, stable sounds pretty good to me. What does stable look like? Then we're going to talk a little bit about what those things are that would either keep stability or create stability.
Now, in your experience, Scott, do you tend to see these 5 stages appear linearly in people's life, or do they cycle through, or how does that tend to work?
Well, the first thing is that most people don't start at the bottom and work their way up. They start someplace. Often they start, frankly, in the middle. If you think of that, sort of interdependence, someone leaves the home and, maybe they've got a college education, they've got their first job, but they're managing within their means. They are probably not starting at surviving. They're probably starting at struggling in most cases, because they're, and this is where we get into the definition of all of these, very frankly, is that what surviving means is that your time horizon, today. You're worried about today.
Right.
You're worried about if things are going to work out at all. The strugglers, their time horizon is 2 weeks. When does my next paycheck come? And they're the ones who live paycheck to paycheck. When you get to the point of stable, now you start to take a time horizon that's at least a year or 2 out there, and you start to say, okay, how do I, create a cash reserve? How do I start to plan for some things? The secure folks, and stable is an interesting one because a lot of people plateau right there, and they don't really make it very quickly to the next level. But the secure, that's where you have a really long time horizon, and you start, planning out for, gosh, maybe you're 45 years old and you're planning out for retirement. Now, it's not to say that those people that are at that other level shouldn't plan longer term, but it is to say that there's some relatively urgent things in their life that they have to get taken care of before they go to the next phase.
Right.
So I had a couple come in, I think we first met about 4 weeks ago. And frankly, it was another one of the interviews for my book, or turned into an interview for my book, because this is a couple that, they really had some nasty stuff going on in their financial lives, that through the course of paying for their kids' college education and trips and things, they'd accumulated way too much debt. And in every case where we find someone is really slipped backwards, there is usually one culprit, and that culprit is debt. And they had not managed their debt very well. Well, they actually had started down the path of the Dave Ramsey course, and Dave does a really great job on help people focus on, here's the debt, how do I take care of it, how do I get out of it. And they'd spent about 3 years working on that debt. And so when they came to me, they really had gone from that spot of, they were kind of in between the surviving and the struggling, and now they were kind of in between the the struggling to stable. They weren't quite stable yet.
Okay.
And so then we started to be able to rearrange and start to look at some things for their future.
Right.
And change their time horizon a little bit. And with a little bit of rearrangement in their situation, you can get them usually to that point, that next category with, of course, their effort. They have to continue to keep paying off whatever debt is left over and not take on the new debt.
Mm-hmm.
Countless stories of people that, they get the debt paid off and then they go out and they do it all over again.
Right.
I mean, it's really a hard thing for some people because we don't have good systems in our economy, in our lives, in our society to monitor this. We used to, what it was? A checkbook. Because at the end of writing a check, you had to rectify your balance. You didn't have to, but most people did. And today, it's a charge card. You don't know where you're at till the end of the month, and it's usually not good.
Right.
So at any rate, that's what those different pieces are about, is struggling. You're living paycheck to paycheck, stable. That often is a plateau, but at least you're looking out a couple months, and then finally secure, and hopefully we get, help people get to, or they get there themselves, to that part of surplus where it's quite comfortable, and they actually can start some charitable gifting and some other things, or just, relax a little bit, either one.
Sure. Again, our topic today, financial strategies with Scott Wardell, putting defense into your investment portfolio. We also mentioned earlier today the giveaway is the book
Generosity by Gordon MacDonald.
Right. What is it that you want listeners to get from this book?
Well, I really want them to get the connection between giving and their happiness. Now, those people that are at those lower levels, if they're really in the phase of surviving or struggling, probably not quite as relevant a book to them. But if you are stable, secure, or you have surplus, if you're in any of those 3 categories, this book, and frankly, if you enjoy devotional books, then this is really a great little book, and we will be happy to mail it out to you at no cost. So just call that number, and we should give it right now since we meant it, 1-855-346-4332, and ask for the book, Generosity, and we'll send it out to you.
Sure.
Okay?
Investing has to include risk, but you mentioned earlier the difference between having that risk and also staying up night worrying about it. So what are some of the steps that you would propose to worry less about your money?
Well, there's 2 steps. Have a plan, work the plan.
That seems easy.
Yeah, exactly. Seems pretty easy. And I would throw in a third thing that is always advocated by my friend Doug Lennox, and that is throw off discouragement. Because there isn't a plan where all of a sudden it doesn't look like it's working that well. I mean, think of anything that you've ever done of importance. There's always some difficult part or some discouraging part. So have a plan means you understand your cash flow, you understand where your investments are at, you understand your goals, and they're lined up with your values and your beliefs. Now, I know that's a mouthful for a lot of people, and I don't expect them to be able to do that by themselves. That's why we exist, is to help people establish all of those things. What are my goals? What are my values? What are my beliefs? And how do they come together with my actions so that I'm actually living in alignment? And living in alignment it's a key in any aspect of your life. It's a key in how you decide to get exercise for yourself, how you treat your body. It's certainly a key for your finances as well.
Sure.
And so the easy answer is have a plan and work the plan and monitor, examine what's going on, frankly, and what that means is open up your statement. Examine what's going on, and if you say, I don't understand this, then do something that I do. If I don't understand something, I partner with someone who does.
Sure.
Because I can read a lot of texts to try and get a good understanding. Some people learn that way, but what you end up learning is a slice and not the comprehensive thing. Get with someone who's got experience and who can partner with you in explaining this. That's why I encourage people to see their financial advisor, call one if they've never called one, ask for a free consultation, sit down, and as I said earlier, if they start to make you feel foolish, then end the meeting early. They're not for you. That's the goal is, the goal, frankly, is to help people that really need help and want help.
Right.
And those are folks typically who might not be completely skilled in all of the, the mechanics associated with finance.
Now, the idea of not worrying about your money, to me, seems to kind of butt up against the idea that you have a plan, because at some point you're going to reach an obstacle and your plan may get thrown off course. Is flexibility really necessary and really important?
Flexibility is really important, but here's the thing is that you have to understand what a plan does for people. Plan gives people control. And most people, I always say there's 3 buckets in life. There's those things over which you have control. That's what I call bucket 1. Bucket 2 is those things over which you have influence. You can't control them, but you can direct them a little bit this way or that. Bucket 3 is those things over which are out of your control. Now, what a financial plan does for many people, and of course, a financial plan where people don't act on the recommendations is just a plan. It's
right.
Just something to sit on the shelf. But it helps them have an intimate understanding of their own situation, their own goals, and that helps them do what? Gain control. So if you don't know what your cash flow looks like, if you don't know how much money you should have in cash reserve or how much you have in cash reserve, if you don't know how much you've got in your income bucket or your growth bucket, and if you don't know if there's any protection associated with it, you can't possibly control it. So once you start to have a really, examine it closely, you start to gain control over it. And I think that control is something that for most people, control and direction. So if you say, I don't know which way this thing's even sailing, you've got to have stress associated with that. Ambiguity, I think, in your finances is the biggest cause of stress. I don't know where I'm at. How could you possibly feel any peace of mind if you don't know where you're at?
Now, Labor Day weekend, everybody's sitting down, sending the kids back to school, starting to plan again. You mentioned already one of the more common times of the year you see people setting up financial plans and financial goals. What sorts of resolutions should people be considering this time of year?
I think it's a good word. They should be resolved to do a couple things. First of all, if they have debt, they should really figure out a way to eliminate it or reduce it in some fashion. Okay.
And this kind of goes back to what we just talked about, having the plan and working the plan.
Absolutely. If they examine your retirement plan, and as we were talking in an earlier story, don't leave money on the table. So if you are eligible in a 401k or any kind of retirement plan for matching funds, absolutely go in and make certain that you're getting your matching funds, and please look at what you're invested in to see if it makes sense. We are in the 3rd stage of recovery, and in the beginning stages of most recoveries, I'm talking generally now, the small cap stocks and the mid cap stocks tend to do the best. In the middle stages, you're more towards the mid cap stocks doing better, and then in the latter stages, it's more towards the large cap and even dividend paying stocks. So you need to kind of look at it and say, where am I at? What makes sense for my risk tolerance, and how should I make some adjustments?
Right.
In this. So examine your retirement plan, and again, examine your risk. So when people say, gosh, I can't afford to go backward, well, then you'd better do something about it, because backwards is a possibility. It's a probability. I don't know how high it is. If I knew that,
you'd have a lot of money.
I'd have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
But the point of it is you have to examine those risks. And one of the things that Chris Farrell says in his book, and his book is The New Frugality, and it's really the lessons learned out of this last recession, is create a margin of safety. Figure out how you can have that margin of safety so you're not butted right up against the edge of the risk. Do not stand on the edge of the cliff.
Now, a lot of people's portfolios, Scott, probably include investments like the ones that we have seen tank over the past couple weeks.
Yep.
If people are seeing this up and down all over the place, what are things they can do strategically, going back to our topic now, to kind of put that defense into their portfolio?
Absolutely. Well, you can reduce your risk. you probably...
Or you're talking market specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can reduce your investment risk, and but you can't really eliminate it. Let me give you one example of that is, in the past, a lot of people would take their their growth investments, predominantly stocks and the like, and they would they would shift them predominantly to income-producing investments. The idea was to reduce their overall risk. And in some way that makes sense, but it's not very exact or very scientific, because what happens when people do that is they get themselves in a spot where they can't keep up with inflation. Now, I don't know about all our listeners, but I will say that I talk to a lot of people that don't believe that the numbers that are reported recently on inflation are very accurate, because I'll tell you what we pay a lot more for: transportation, gasoline, and food. Okay, so
Right.
if those two things are going up substantially, then inflation is in your life. And if your income is too fixed, you have a different risk than the volatility. You have that risk of keeping up. And those people that are way over on the conservative side and have invested in just things like CDs, their interest rate has dropped from a few years ago at 4 or 5% down to 1% or less. So they're now getting 20% of the income from those particular investments, and costs are still going up. So I don't call that risk-free in any way. Yeah, their principal isn't going up or down, but boy, are they really going backwards on their ability to maintain their lifestyle. And isn't that really what it's all about? So the other thing is, just make sure you get more than just balance. Boy, when people say, well, I'm 60-40, it's not that easy, folks. You've got to have the right kind of mix. You've got to figure out, well, what's my international exposure in these markets? And in your fixed investments as well, do you really want all your fixed investments in U.S. bonds? Or there are other countries out there that are paying more interest and have a fair amount of stability that you should consider as well. So the other thing is, please take some time to research some of the new methods of transferring risk, because the days of 60-40 going to 40-60, in my opinion, my humble opinion, are over. Now what you need to do is have actually more assets in growth according to your risk tolerance. More assets in growth during retirement than you were in the past, but find some ways to transfer some risk to somebody else, because there's some very, very interesting investment products, I'm not going to get into the details on air here today, that allow you to transfer the risk and still transfer the downside risk and still get some of the growth that you need. And you got to look into that. So I encourage people to do that. And the last thing I would suggest is that in some ways they may need to just notch it down on their aggressiveness. So if they've been investing in a moderately aggressive portfolio, they might have to go down to a moderate portfolio. If they've been aggressive, they might have to go down to moderate aggressive. But people might need to address that. And there are funds out there that do that semi-automatically, the target funds. They've got some of their own issues along the way, because it doesn't take a comprehensive look of your investments. But it's certainly worth your looking at, because over time it doesn't.
Sure. Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell, our topic today. We're talking about putting a defense back into your investment portfolio. Stick around, back in just a few.
Nearly 3 million members look to Thrivent Financial for Lutherans to help them achieve their financial goal. Nearly 3 million people know that Thrivent Financial is committed to excellence in financial services and caring for others. Get to know Thrivent Financial and the quality of products and services they can offer you. In Minnesota, you have a host of representatives to help you with your financial needs. Contact your local Thrivent representatives Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731 or call 1-855-346-4332. Registered representatives for securities offered through Thrivent Investment Management Incorporated, member FINRA and SIPC.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us this week for this edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. As I mentioned before, our topic today is putting the defense back into your investment portfolio. Always, toward the bottom of the hour, we do have to mention there's a special gift, a special offer.
Right, special offer for people who want to call in. We'll be happy to send it out. And we have been talking about the book Generosity by Gordon MacDonald, but I'm going to offer something else for the second half here. So if people want to call in, they can get this booklet. It's about 14 pages, I believe, Managing Your Retirement to Provide a Lifetime of Income. And this is really more for those folks that are in that category of maybe struggling, stable, and secure. There, certainly it can be beneficial to those that are at that surplus stage as well. But I really want to have something for those other folks that are like, gosh, I'm just trying to make ends meet, and I want my retirement, to be secure. Then I think this is probably a better booklet for you. So it's called Managing Your Retirement to Provide a Lifetime of Income. And again, the number for them to get that booklet is 1-855-346-4332. So call in, give us your name and an address in which to send this to, and ask for the retirement booklet, Managing Your Retirement to Provide a Lifetime of Income, and we'll send that out to you right away.
Now, we've been talking about managing risk a little bit, how to not worry about your finances because you build a defense into your portfolio.
Right.
But I would think you still want a little bit of offensive strategy. You still want to grow.
Oh, you have to.
How do you have the best of both worlds?
Yeah, Steph, it's a great question because you have to have that growth. So, if we step back a minute, first of all, it is to have the right strategy. And the right strategy would include your assessment of your cash reserves, your income bucket, and your growth bucket, and how much you need for each time period. So typically when someone's retired, we try and get that combination of income and cash reserves to last at least 5 years, because there are very few down markets that last more than 5 years. But it's a good idea to even have more in there than is required there, because here's the thing. Let's say you start out and you retire, and the first 4 years go marvelously well, and the 5th year turns out to be like 2008.
Sure.
Well, gosh, you don't want to harvest anything from your growth bucket at that point in time because it's down substantially. So really, if there's enough dollars, we like to put about 7 years in there between your income bucket and your cash reserve bucket, so you don't have to take from the growth bucket while it's down. So that's the big strategy piece. So what are the other pieces? There are some really, really interesting products that are out there today, and some, as we talked earlier, you can get good growth in the market, good asset allocation. So it's a combination. They can be a combination of stocks and bonds and a whole variety of different kinds of investment niches within that. So it might, for instance, have some international. It might have, a small cap, mid cap growth and value. So it can have often a very well-rounded kind of portfolio. But then also many of these now come with a guarantee on your principal over some particular time period. So that's something that people should start to research. There are other investments out there where instead of guaranteeing the principal, people can elect to guarantee the income. Now that's an interesting thing, because if you say, well, gosh, my principal, what do I really have this money for? I have part of it eventually to create income during my retirement. So if it's the income side that you want guaranteed, there's a way for many people to do that as well. And of course, the third thing is often people want some guarantee to what goes to their heirs. So that's the on death. The first two are what happens during your lifetime. The second one is what happens when I die. And there's ways to put different kinds of guarantees on that as well. And if they are working with a qualified professional, that professional can explain to them how this works and how these products, may or may not fit into their portfolio. And I say that because, in some cases, people, especially those people that are in that surplus stage, they really don't need a lot of guarantees associated because, frankly, going backwards, 10,000, 15,000, even 100,000 really won't hurt them. Because there's enough there. On the other hand, if people are in that category, where a backward slide, and whether it be the market or the value of their investments, could really hurt the overall their retirement picture, then frankly they should at least research this and find out if it fits into their overall portfolio. And I would never say on the radio, because I think, we have this disclaimer that says your individual situation may be different. That's so true.
Right.
And you should consult your tax advisor, and you should consult, especially if you're doing anything associated with what happens through your state, consult your attorney to get the estate plan. And really, oftentimes, it's a good idea to get these professionals in the same room. I really enjoy going to either the accountant's office or the attorney's office with my clients, because oftentimes they don't even know what questions to ask. And it's really fun to help them through that process and kind of clear it all up.
Scott, I've heard if someone's retired in their 60s, the thought has often been they would switch from growth assets over to income-producing assets. How does that work really in reality?
Well, that's a very, very old retirement model. I call that Generation 1 retirement planning. And frankly, what happened after Generation 1 retirement planning, and that is kind of a wholesale switch from growth to income, is we had several different iterations, starting back through the 70s and the 80s of how people would, in fact, manage their money better. And out of that came the 60-40 model. The 60-40 model, of course, was 60% stocks, 40% bonds while you're accumulating, and then switching it to 40% stocks, 60% bonds while you're taking some distribution. That also turned out to be far, far too general and didn't really meet the needs of people very exactly at all. So that's why we now are on what I refer to as fourth generation retirement planning, where in fact we help guide people on an annual basis and say, is there a way or should we actually harvest from those growth assets at a midpoint? So let's just take an example. Let's say, and it's just an illustration, let's say that you are invested in your growth assets in order to fill up your next income bucket, had to return somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% in a 5-year period of time. Okay, so simple math, that's about 5% a year. They had to return 25% in a 5-year period of time in order for you to harvest them and put it in your income bucket. Let's say that you get to your second year and you're already up that 25%. Now, wouldn't it make a ton of sense to harvest at least half of that, put it over in the income bucket, get it there early, and then allow the rest of it to grow? These are some of the strategies on a monitor on a year-by-year basis, where when and how you harvest might be determined by the performance of your investments and also what inflation is doing in your life at the same time. So I would say that the model of switching over to almost exclusively an income-producing kinds of investments probably is not going to keep up with inflation for most people. Here's the thing. If you're 65 years old, I would suggest that you need to plan at least for 30 years of retirement, because you don't know.
Right.
You might live to 95. We all know folks that live to 100. So let's really take at least a 30-year horizon. So if someone came to me and was not retired and said, I have a 30-year investment horizon, we'd probably be looking at some major growth assets. The same is true during their retirement. They need to have those growth assets, but to our discussion today, they probably need to put some defense in that overall strategy, so if they can't afford to go backwards, there's something that would protect them.
Do you think that model was flawed to begin with, or is it just that culture has changed and the economy has changed so much since that idea was really important?
I think it was flawed to begin with, very honestly. It really did not maximize the use of people's assets very well, but how else were they to think about it? The newer models were not yet established, and the idea that there was, really 3 buckets, a cash reserve, an income bucket, and a growth bucket, and you harvest from one bucket and put it in the other one was really not even conceived yet by most people.
Right.
The harvest strategy has, really only been around and been widely used for 5-7 years, something like that. So, but there are still professionals out there that are using the old 60-40 to 40-60. And so if that is as accurate as your financial consultant is using, I would question that, frankly. I'm not saying that they're bad consultants necessarily, but I think that model is at least 20 years antiquated, to be very frank. So I think you gotta keep up with the times relative to some of the retirement income systems and strategies.
Sure. Now, I know there's a bunch of terms, dollar cost averaging, reverse dollar cost averaging. What is it that people need to understand before they really start down a retirement distribution strategy that might actually get them in trouble?
Absolutely. Let's start with dollar cost averaging as you're accumulating. Dollar cost averaging is a risk mitigation technique. Doesn't take it out, but if you are buying into an investment where the investment itself is fluctuating, then very simply put, let's say that the high range is $10 and the low range is $5 per share. obviously, if you're putting in $100 a month, you're going to buy more shares when it's low. You're going to buy 20 shares. You're only going to buy 10 shares when it's high. So by going systematically into a market, you will get better than the average share price because you're always buying more when it's low and less when it's high. So it averages out beautifully in a fluctuating market. And we use it a lot for risk mitigation. And 401ks can do exactly that for you if you set them up right. Okay, so accumulation, dollar cost averaging, cool, it works. Practice it. How about on the other side? Well, exactly the reverse happens. If you've got a fixed dollar amount that is coming out for you to help support the income for your retirement, think of it exactly the opposite of what I just said. If I've got $100 coming out and my share price is $5, I got to sell 20 shares to make that $100 come out. And if it's $10 a share, I only have to sell 10, okay? So what that happens is it averages your price the opposite way, and it is extremely harmful in down markets because you might have, let me just do it this way. Let's say you have a $500,000 investment portfolio that you are retired on, and you figure you're going to take, because you've got income from other sources, I'm just going to make the math easy, but you'd never take this much. But let's say you're going to take $50,000 a year from your $500,000. Now that's way too much money, folks, because you go through it too fast. But the math will make sense.
Right.
Okay, so let's say that investment hits a bad period in the market and it drops from $500,000 to $300,000. Okay, could that happen? Well, many people say, yeah, that could happen.
It's already happened.
It happened in 2008 and into 2009. It's already happened. No, most of those people have gained substantial portions of that back. So what happened? Your $500,000 is worth $300,000, and now you're forced to withdraw $50,000. So now you're down to what? $250,000. So in 1 year's period of time, you're down to half the value you were. See how detrimental that $50,000 is against $250 versus $500.
Right.
It's too much for $500, by the way, but the math is easier for people to understand. So you really have to be careful. What if the market stays down for a couple of years? Well, wow, you base that dollar amount withdrawal based on the high water mark, not the low water mark, and it'll just eat into it way too fast, and your money will not last that way. So that's how reverse dollar cost averaging goes, and that's why you have to be so careful.
Okay. We're talking about putting a defense into your investment portfolio today on Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. More with Scott next.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
Happy Labor Day weekend, by the way, and thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Scott, thanks again for joining us in the studio.
It is just absolutely great to be here. It really is. It's a pleasure, and hopefully our listeners are able to capture a thing or two that really helps them grab a hold of, examine, pay attention to, and improve their overall financial lives.
A little bit of a different feel to the show today. No guests, but we've been able to, I think, really kind of dive into some good topics for everyone.
Well, I'm hoping that, that it is Labor Day and people are getting back to work and getting back to school, that they can also get back to being serious about, let's grab a hold of the finances and really make progress between now and the end of the year, because it can be done.
Right.
They just have to pay attention to a few things here along the way. So, and one step maybe, if they call for the booklet, it is called Managing Your Retirement to Provide a Lifetime of Income. And I'm going to give that number one more time. It is 1-855-346-4332. They can also call their local office. In our listening area here, we have many representatives from Thrivent and other qualified financial planners for that matter. So call in, get some professional advice, and you may not think you need it, but frankly, I'm willing to bet that in most cases you're going to find one or two opportunities that you had not discovered before you had that consultation. So I would encourage people to do that. It's a great time of year to make that resolution.
Our topic today, kind of putting a defense strategy into your portfolio. Scott, how can somebody produce an income stream with the extremely low interest rates we're seeing today?
Well, let's start with what doesn't work.
Okay.
Money markets are paying like zero. So nice income, no income stream at all.
No.
Okay. CDs at the bank, certificates of deposit, about 1%. I'm generalizing. It depends upon how long out they go. 1.25. You know, especially if you're used to getting 4% over the last, if you go back 3 years and now all of a sudden you're at 1%, that's probably not going to produce that income stream for you. So what you need to do, and we've been talking about this, you need to create an income bucket for yourself and probably use a mix of bonds and probably have to use some international bonds because, frankly, there are parts of the world that are not in lockstep with the U.S. in terms of interest rates. We have historically low interest rates going on right now in the United States. It's not necessarily true in the rest of the world. Now, granted, they're not super high elsewhere, and you always have to be careful of currency exchange, and meaning that if, in fact, you invest in some other country in their bonds and their currency goes down, so does your investment. So, that's why you have to have the right percentage and say that is at risk for this thing. Here's the other thing, however, though. What if the U.S. dollar goes down compared to their currency? Now you've actually made some money and have a gain. So both possibilities. And the other thing is I strongly urge people to look at their own investments to see if they've got an older investment that has a floor on it. There are a lot of those old and new fixed annuity contracts that have a floor of, it might be 3%, it might be 3.5%, it might even be 4%. And if they have a flexible payment option, you might be able to add money into those contracts and get 3.5% or 4% on a fixed contract. So that would be a way to really get substantially higher rates. Although, one big qualifier, make absolutely certain that the company that you're investing in has a really high rating. Because what happened when the market crashed in 2008 and 2009? What went down? Lots of big insurance companies. And so be very, learn the lesson from what happened there and make sure that you are in a very highly rated company before you even go in for an attractive rate like that.
Right. As we're talking about those defensive strategies, I know bonds have been thought to be a very good defensive position for portfolios. Can you give us some info on how international bonds might be part of the investor's portfolio?
Absolutely. It has to be, as we mentioned a minute ago, it has to be a partition. You don't want to go all that direction. One thing that a good financial planner, advisor, consultant, whoever the title of the person you're working with will do is they will make sure if you do an asset allocation model that you're not overly weighted in any particular area. So don't chase yields. Do not chase yields and say, wow, there's a high yield, let's get that one. Make sure that it is a portion of what it is you're doing and keep yourself in the right kind of balance according to your risk. So for some people, you know what percent that means? 0. Okay. For others, it might mean 5% of the portfolio. It might even mean as much as 10% of the portfolio. It depends upon the risk tolerance, but they have to really get a handle on that as well.
Okay. Now, tax-exempt bonds have been a popular investment for high-income earners. Could that be part of a defensive strategy?
Absolutely, it could be. But, here we go. We have to qualify that, too.
Right.
There's been a lot of concerns about municipalities and their ability to pay. Most of that has proven to be really not true. Now, that doesn't mean it's not all true. So you have to investigate that as well to make sure. I would encourage people to look at a broad portfolio so that, if they're in a mutual fund that has tax-exempt bonds and they're substantially high-rated bonds, and I favor general obligation bonds for most people as well and not the revenue bonds because, they're just backed by those particular taxpayers. But in that particular case, and the other thing that I have to add on this is that tax-exempt bonds aren't always tax-exempt to everyone. So an example is, let's say you're collecting Social Security. This is one example. You're collecting Social Security. Tax-exempt interest gets added into the calculation of whether or not your Social Security will be taxed. So if a tax-exempt bond income adds to your tax bill by making more of your Social Security taxable, well, then it's not really tax exempt, is it?
Right.
So you really got to, again, meet with your tax advisor and say, am I in that category, and is that the way it works for me, before you go whole hog into that. So seek the advice of your tax advisor and your financial professional on that one, because you need them both.
Now, it's different for everybody, but can you suggest other kinds of systems or other adjustments people should consider when they're trying to put defense into their portfolio?
Systems is the key word here, because most people don't pay enough attention themselves, so they have to have part of their investments that are going to be managed somewhat automatically. Oftentimes, it's just a rebalancing function that you can ask your advisor to say, can we turn on an automatic rebalancing function here to these funds, or can I invest in a fund that rebalances itself according to what might be happening in the market and what the investment professionals feel needs to be done. So certainly ask those questions, because a lot of people have good intentions. They invest broadly. They pick a whole bunch of different kinds of funds so that they have exposure and potentially benefit from a lot of different areas, but then they don't pay any attention to it. So when it gets out of whack, it stays out of whack. You need to look at the possibility of getting a system that automatically readjusts for you. I'm not saying it's absolutely the right thing, but you should at least look into it.
As we wrap up the show today, Scott, what do you think the main reason is people don't put enough defense into their investment strategies?
I think it's mostly their experience. I have a couple investors as well that I have to kind of pull my hair out to try and figure out why they want to stay so aggressive all the time and resist the chance to put defense in their portfolio. I think that when they've had good experience, then in fact it makes it kind of hard for them to say, well, gosh, what we've been doing is working, and sometimes what we've been doing has worked and it won't work going forward. So I think that's probably the number one thing or not paying attention.
Sure. What do we have for next week?
Well, next week we're going to do part 2 of creating defense in your portfolio, and we're going to talk about managing risk. I think that this is the kind of thing we need to continue to chat about to create more peace of mind and give people a pathway to grabbing control of their finances and their financial strategies.
Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Scott, thanks again.
Thank you.
Happy
and
Labor Day,
have
everyone.
a great Labor Day weekend. Enjoy.
We hope you've enjoyed the past hour of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. Join us again next week for Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell on KMRS Morris.